He armed America's most dangerous militias. The FBI's 4-year wilderness manhunt begins. Thomas Kellner had served his country for 12 years. A decorated Army sergeant with expertise in weapons systems and explosives, he'd earned commendations in Iraq and Afghanistan. But when federal agents raided his remote Montana compound in March 2018, they discovered a different kind of war. Inside the fortified ranch house, investigators found enough military-grade weapons to arm a small army. Assault rifles, armor-piercing ammunition, grenade launchers, and C4 explosives filled multiple outbuildings. According to ATF records, Kellner had spent 3 years building the largest illegal arms trafficking network in the Mountain West. The investigation began when domestic terror analysts noticed a pattern. Militia groups across Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming were suddenly acquiring sophisticated weapons they shouldn't have been able to afford or access. The common thread led back to Kellner's operation. He was supplying some of the most dangerous extremist groups in America, said FBI Special Agent Rachel Morrison, who led the investigation. These weren't hunters buying rifles. These were organizations planning attacks on federal facilities. Court documents later revealed the scope of Kellner's network. He'd sold over 2,000 weapons in 2 years, generating nearly $4 million in illegal profits. His customers included anti-government militias, white supremacist cells, and domestic terror organizations across 6 states. The weapons traced to Kellner's network had already been used in 3 separate attacks on federal buildings, resulting in 2 deaths and 17 injuries. Deputy U.S. Marshal James Fletcher was among those wounded when militia members used Kellner's weapons in a raid on a federal courthouse. When agents finally obtained warrants, they were racing against time. But Thomas Kellner was already gone. Federal agents surrounded his compound at dawn on March 12, 2018, only to find abandoned buildings and cold ashes in the fireplace. Kellner had vanished into the Montana wilderness, taking his survival skills and his contacts with him. Within hours, the FBI added him to their 10 most wanted list. The charges were severe: 47 counts of illegal arms trafficking, conspiracy to supply weapons to domestic terror organizations, and violations of the National Firearms Act. If convicted, he faced life in federal prison. But first, they had to find him. The escape had been carefully planned. Federal investigators later determined that Kellner had received advance warning of the raid, likely from a contact within the local law enforcement community. By the time agents breached his compound, he'd been gone for at least 6 hours. Kellner had disappeared into some of America's most unforgiving terrain. The Montana wilderness stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. Dense forests, steep mountain passes, and remote valleys where a man could hide indefinitely. His military training had prepared him for exactly this scenario. He had every advantage, recalls Agent Morrison. Survival skills, weapons expertise, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Plus, he had a network of sympathizers willing to help. The FBI immediately deployed a massive search operation. Over 200 federal agents, park rangers, and local law enforcement officers combed the Rocky Mountain wilderness. Helicopters with thermal imaging swept the forests day and night. Search dogs tracked his scent to a creek bed, where the trail disappeared. Early leads poured in from across the region. Kellner was reportedly spotted at a gas station in Kalispell, buying supplies at a survivalist store in Missoula, and camping in Glacier National Park. Each sighting triggered immediate response teams, but they all proved false. The survivalist community that had once bought his weapons now seemed determined to protect him. Anonymous tips led agents to abandoned camps and empty cabins. Communications intercepts suggested a loose network of supporters was actively helping him evade capture. Winter arrived early that year, dumping 3 feet of snow across the search area by November. The harsh conditions forced the FBI to scale back their ground operations. Kellner, with his military survival training, was better equipped for the brutal Montana winter than the agents pursuing him. "We knew he was out there," said Agent Morrison, "but the wilderness was his ally. Every storm, every blizzard worked in his favor. By Christmas 2018, The active search had consumed over 800,000 man-hours and cost taxpayers $1.2 million. The trail had gone completely cold. Thomas Kellner had vanished into the American wilderness, but the FBI wasn't giving up. The FBI established a permanent task force dedicated to finding Thomas Kellner, assigning 50 agents across 4 field offices to the case. The operation cost exceeded $200,000 per month, but federal prosecutors insisted he was too dangerous to remain free. Every day he was loose, more weapons could end up in the wrong hands, said U.S. Attorney Michael Rodriguez. We had to assume he was still selling to militia groups, still financing domestic terrorism. Months turned into years, but the manhunt continued. Agents developed an extensive network of informants within survivalist communities across the Mountain West. They monitored gun shows, tracked suspicious purchases, and infiltrated militia communications. In June 2019, they got their first real break. A confidential informant reported seeing Kellner at a remote cabin near Yellowstone. FBI tactical teams surrounded the location within hours, only to find it abandoned. Fresh supplies and warm ashes suggested they'd missed him by minutes. The pattern repeated across 3 states over the next 18 months. Kellner seemed to stay constantly mobile, never remaining in one location for more than a few days. He was living off-grid using cash only and avoiding all digital communications. The closest they came was at a gun show in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, in September 2020. An undercover agent spotted a man matching Kellner's description, examining military surplus equipment. When backup agents moved to intercept, the suspect simply walked away and disappeared into the crowd. It was definitely him, the agent later testified. Same build, same mannerisms, but by the time we reached his position, he was gone. It was like he had a sixth sense. Security cameras captured partial footage of the encounter, but the suspect wore a baseball cap and kept his face turned away from the cameras. The FBI enhanced the images, but couldn't make a positive identification. By 2021, Kellner had been on the run for 3 years. The task force had investigated over 1,500 tips, conducted 200 raids, and spent $2.3 million. Critics questioned whether the fugitive was even still alive, but Agent Morrison never wavered. We knew he was out there, patient, careful, but eventually he'd make a mistake. They always do. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In January 2022, an undercover FBI agent successfully infiltrated a militia group operating near the Canadian border. For months, Agent Marcus Williams posed as a weapons buyer, slowly building trust within the organization. The group's leadership had been seeking military-grade explosives for what they called defensive preparations. During a late-night meeting at a remote ranch, they mentioned having access to the best supplier in the business, someone with military training who could provide anything they needed. They were clearly talking about Kellner, Agent Williams later testified. They wouldn't say his name, but the descriptions matched perfectly. Former Army, weapons expert, operating somewhere in the Montana wilderness. Williams spent weeks earning deeper access to the network. In March 2022, the group's leader finally made contact with their mysterious supplier. The communication came through an encrypted messaging system, but FBI cyber specialists were monitoring every exchange. Kellner was offering to sell his remaining weapons cache, everything he had left from his original operation. The asking price was $300,000 for assault rifles, explosives, and ammunition. He proposed a meeting location, a remote cabin near Glacier National Park. This was it, said Agent Morrison. After 4 years, he was finally coming out of hiding, but we knew it was also our most dangerous moment. He'd be heavily armed and expecting trouble. The FBI had less than 48 hours to prepare. They assembled a tactical team of 30 agents, including hostage rescue specialists and wilderness warfare experts. The meeting location was 15 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by hiking through treacherous mountain terrain. Satellite imagery revealed an isolated cabin surrounded by dense forest and steep cliffs, perfect for an ambush, but also perfect for a trap. Kellner had chosen his ground carefully, with multiple escape routes through the wilderness. As the team prepared for the operation, Agent Morrison reviewed everything they knew about their target. He survived 4 years in some of America's harshest wilderness. He's military trained, heavily armed, and has nothing left to lose. The final hunt was about to begin. On March 28, 2022, FBI tactical teams moved into position around the remote cabin Didwai. The operation required a 15-mile hike through snow and ice, carrying full tactical gear. Agents surrounded the location before dawn, establishing overlapping fields of fire and blocking all escape routes. Inside the cabin, Thomas Kellner waited with enough weapons to equip a small army. The thermal imaging revealed 2 heat signatures, Kellner and the militia buyer who'd come to complete the transaction. Both men were armed. At 6:47 a.m., Agent Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. FBI, Thomas Kellner, you're surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. For 30 minutes, silence. Then Kellner's voice echoed from inside the cabin. I know why you're here. I'm not going to make this easy. Negotiators established communication, talking with Kellner for over 2 hours. He seemed resigned but defiant, acknowledging that his 4-year run was over. The militia buyer surrendered first, walking out with his hands raised. Kellner held out until 9:15 a.m. When he finally emerged, he carried no weapons but wore a tactical vest loaded with grenades. One wrong move and we all die together, he warned. FBI snipers had clear shots, but Agent Morrison ordered restraint. We've waited 4 years. We can wait a little longer. The standoff ended peacefully. Kellner carefully removed his vest and placed it on the ground, then knelt with his hands behind his head. After 1477 days as a fugitive, Thomas Kellner was finally in federal custody. Inside the cabin, agents discovered the largest weapons cache they'd ever seized from a single individual. 47 assault rifles, 12,000 rounds of ammunition, 50 pounds of military explosives, and detailed plans for attacks on federal facilities. Kellner's trial lasted 6 weeks. Federal prosecutors presented evidence of his extensive arms trafficking network and connections to domestic terror organizations. Deputy Marshal James Fletcher testified about the attack that wounded him, describing the devastating impact of Kellner's weapons in the wrong hands. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. On November 18, 2022, Thomas Kellner was sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the judge read the verdict. Today, Kellner sits in ADX Florence, America's most secure federal prison. His weapons network has been permanently dismantled, and 17 of his customers have been convicted on federal charges. The 4-year manhunt was over. Justice had been served,